Greetings, loved ones. Nice to see you all. Welcome to another episode of Dï5 Lïve, Divergence Live. This is episode 4. This is titled A New Hope. And I think for good reason, as again, us coming together, working the way we're about to, this is the energy that we all need to be working around, surrounding ourselves with and experiencing as one. Okay, we're gonna let Kim have a couple of words in here for a moment, and then we're gonna get right into some questions because there was a bunch of them. Hold on.
Hi, everyone. So just as usual, please make sure that you have your cameras on and that we can see you. And if you have any questions throughout the chat, please put them throughout the video, please put them in the chat. We are keeping track and we will answer them hopefully at our next Q&A. So without further ado, that's pretty much all I had to add today.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim. Moving on, we're just going to move right into the questions here.
Okay, loved one. So as mentioned, the Queens have compiled all of your questions together. So we are going to rattle these off as quickly as possible. So starting with question number 1, what is the birth certificate? Is it a trust or an estate?
Okay, consider the birth certificate loosely as an entity or a vehicle. It can go forwards or reverse. Currently, at the moment, it is evidence of both a trust and an estate. It depends on how we used it. It depends on what we've expressed in it. It depends on what we've abandoned. Believe it or not, it'll sit as an implied trust, which is literally construed to be an estate on the legal side, waiting for the proper man or woman to show up and claim proper right, title, and interest to it. Once you do that, now you've actually taken that estate that was benefiting who? The undertaker, really, the state. They're the ones collecting all the rents, interest, profits, and accruals, not you, right? That's all going into a special fund sitting in the background. So depending on its use and depending where we are, that is what's going to determine what that birth certificate actually is.
Do we need to know the layout and conditions on that trust before we become beneficiaries?
Do we need to know the layout and the trust conditions? Yeah, you know what? Again, given the state of affairs and given where we are and given our position in relation to this trust, again, most of us, if not all of us, are trying to be the grantor, to set up their own trust, to have the beneficial use of it in the future. And again, had to come as grantee first to pull all this off. So really, we are coming and we are having trust conditions established for us. I'm of the opinion that you might want to have some understanding of the workings of this instrument because you're the ones creating it. Essentially, we're helping now to develop these documents. And again, as I was mentioning the other day, I'm going to start unloading all the documents that I'm currently using here, right? Like the deed of trust is coming. A breakdown of the security agreement is coming, like all this. So just, again, be patient. I'm trying to set the stage here a little bit because we do have people that are, watching this and are trying to partake in this effort who don't, or who may not have your level of awareness, your level of experience. So forgive us, me, them. We got to go back a little bit. We got to have this continual overlap where, I need to be able to satisfy the incoming and the outgoing as our knowledge develops. But so, yes, this trust, we should have a general idea of what it's doing, how it's constructed, the purpose of this thing, because it's going to be up to us to be continually adapting it on the fly. I've seen legislation that kind of says this: once you pull the plug, you're on your own. Don't come back to the state now for, oh, how do I do this? And oh, how do I do that? You are literally an entity unto yourself. Now to go and be jumping back, again, that could start to cause problems. We want to stay away from commingling as much as we can. And again, this is where get the court's involvement to help us construct these trusts. As I was mentioning yesterday, the judiciary does not like it when we go create a big mess and then we go ask for help later. Let's go ask for help now, get their input, get their involvement, get things structured properly. Because again, despite my level of awareness and my level of knowledge respecting all this stuff, I still don't know it all. The judge could say, no, this is no good, make it like this. Again, the judges have the power to literally rip up our trust expressions and redo them completely. They are completely within the power of doing that, all to aid and assist the settlor in creating these trusts properly.
Okay, what is subrogation and how do we do that?
Subrogation is essentially when the game is playing, your team has a certain amount of players on it. The opposing team has a certain amount of players on it. When we play the game, when you want to take a rest, when you want to take a break, when you want to come in peace with clean hands, when you want to surrender and say, I don't like this game anymore, that group or that individual that's playing the game can literally walk off the field, substitute a new player to stand into that position. So imagine if we were deemed to be in a war-like environment, who would you rather have stand in your place or stand in action, right? When you're in these combative situations, aren't you in action? That's what they call it. What military figures floating around out there are best served to stand in action for you on your and benefiting the trust? I'm thinking the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, people and titles of this accord. You see the military influence? We got lieutenants, we got generals, we got commanders, we got chiefs, we got, and this is all based in military doctrine. That's where this all comes from. So back to the question at hand, really, subrogation is, okay, we have to do a certain something to get our position elevated. Once we do that, we can actually switch with the other party. That in itself is the subrogation. Now you're the subrogee. They're the subrogor. Now, you will very rarely see the term subrogee used in legal language. It's kind of reserved just for insurance purposes, where they have to switch the tables so that you come in as a creditor, grant that right away to them, and then they now label and stick you with the debt, which you also volunteer to accept. And now that was a quick little subrogation there. That's the administration that they do in the background to our not benefit. They'll call it a privilege, but we know what that really means: taxation and slavery. Yeah, no thanks.
And do you need to do an adverse claim on the birth certificate to subrogate?
Do you need to do an adverse claim on the birth certificate to subrogate? Yeah, it's sure going to help, because again, subrogation is involving titles. We've got 2 titles here minimum that we're dealing with at all times. We got a couple of capacities representing and playing these characters associated to these 2 titles. For example, we're constantly showing up as the debtor and the surety. Okay, so that we've been taught, or we've been trained, and again, Dean and I were guilty of this way back in the day. There's always 2 parties to a contract, the debtor and the creditor. Wrong. There's actually 3 parties to a contract. Those 2 plus the surety. We overlooked the significance of what the surety is and its position. As a matter of fact, it's mentioned a few times in scripture, so it's kind of important. That could be another rabbit hole for another day, but we can go down that one.
And what if you don't have a birth certificate, or do you need a birth certificate to subrogate?
Do you need a birth certificate to subrogate? Well, I'm going to suggest if you're paying taxes, at some point, you volunteered for a position, a role, a duty, an obligation that didn't necessarily belong to you. Imagine that thing was just left dangling there, and then we come along, volunteer. Oh yeah, I'll take that, thanks. Boom, you just swallowed the debt hook, right? Like all the way down, right into your gut. There's no way you're pulling that thing out unless you cut the cord, cut the line, and pass that event. That's why in the past here, we've actually alluded to that as the enema. Literally, flush that thing out of our system, physically, intuitively, spiritually, and on paper. This is part of the subrogation, believe it or not. This is part of the cleansing of our state of being.
So could you do it by expression only?
Yeah, again, you could literally roll in. Parole evidence is very admissible in equity, is very attachable to trust conditions. You can literally, by voice, express these trusts and continue them. Because we again, later in the future, when we come forward, we're actually going to be issuing appropriation orders. These are little variances, or these are little change elements to the trust. This thing continually is adapting. Under appropriation order 1234, the benefited party hereby requires the following. And now the state will literally come in and expropriate for you any of the property interests that we're trying to express. So this actually does come in very handy. But yes, by voice, we can instantly change our position. And we're going to get into some questions here where I'll actually use that as an example.
So one of the questions is, how can they express that? What is some of the terminology?
Some of the terminology to express the trust on the fly is: officer, take notice of active trust conditions. Officer, stand down. Officer, notice. I am disposed of all legal characters in which I may be sued or suffer public liability attached to me. We don't have to go into a whole lot of explaining. Once we start talking trust and once we start saying, equity will not aid a volunteer. Officer, are you asking me to volunteer to assume any and all liability on behalf of the Crown as represented by this particular birth certificate, this registration number, which I am not going to identify as personally? Is that what you're trying to do? Again, you just wing these things off the top of your head once you get good at them. But yeah, can you change the status, standing, or the agreement of the parties on the fly? Absolutely.
Great question coming in from the chat live right now. Can we use the plea of infancy under the Baby Act to say we are not responsible for the actions of the minor?
Well, okay, so good question. The record's actually indicating that you are the minor. So what we could do to offset that is suggest or make, you could declare or you could proclaim, I am not the infant illustrated or alluded to in that instrument. I am of the age of majority. I have disposed of any legal interest. I have by appointment attached that liability to the Crown in right of the province, whichever you are in, provincially or federally, however deep you or however far you want to take it. But when you start talking like this, again, slow this down a little bit. I know your knees are going to be shaking and your hands are going to be doing this, but try to find the strength to slow your speech down just a little bit, because again, all these cops, sheriffs, marshals, etc., they all have these lapel mics. Everything is recorded, including the video camera that they got nowadays, mounted pretty much right in the center of their chest, pointed right at you. So imagine you're literally speaking onto a record because you're kind of creating a living accord on your behalf right now. And as a matter of fact, I was speaking to the Queens last night. What we're going to do here in the next very quick future is I'm actually going to provide a list, a page, and we'll actually share it with you guys. If cop says this, you say that. When judge says this, you say that. And I'll keep them short. I'll keep them tight so that they're easy to remember. But you know what? It's kind of like until you see them, then you're like, oh yeah, perfect. That makes sense. Oh, that's a good one. Once you see it, you'll assimilate it really simply. But if I were to ask you, okay, Debbie, I would like you to come up with 30 items tomorrow and present it to us as a group as to what you would say to an officer. You might be like, a little bit tough, right? Again, having the knowledge, having the wisdom to help the group here understand the basic do's and don'ts. The first and foremost thing, I should wait because that's a question coming up, so I won't go there. But yeah, okay, just to surmise, yes, do these things on the fly. Viva voce, by voice, that is the most powerful way of doing this. Although deeds, when you're going to record them, they must be in writing, because how do you record a vocal deed? Now we're getting into Star Wars territory, but for now, let's just worry about how that is. So I think we end up the next question there.
Okay, so speaking of cops driving, the V ports, we'll be careful of the language that we use, masks, etc. What kind of forms or paperwork should we carry with us at all times to protect ourselves?
Yeah, okay, so to protect yourself, this is where this whole adverse claim package came together. When you attach an affidavit to a live original certificate that you've actually done something to, you've brought value to it. And when you combine that, even if you didn't have the security agreement attached to that, wow, are you ever in a power position just holding, that birth certificate perfected and the adverse claim attached to it? Remember, an adverse claim is specific to a financial asset. What financial asset could we possibly be talking about? We're talking about the bond, the basic bond that starts the whole show. That security is what gets the entire commercial realm going. Okay, so I can speak to this one from firsthand knowledge, firsthand experience. I experienced driving through a check stop on the highway in the province where I was from 6-ish years ago. Cop pulled me over, license and registration. Sorry, officer, I'm not possessed of those. Okay, pull over, I'm towing your vehicle. 2 minutes later, he comes back, driver's license and registration. sorry, officer, I don't carry those. Well, what have you got for identification? The birth certificate? Nothing done to it. Bare, blank, and the Bible. I quoted a line or two out of there. I believe it was Deuteronomy 7:23 or 7:25, something in that neck of the woods, suggesting that I will not volunteer to identify or act as any graven image, as that is not in keeping with my religious beliefs. He goes, hang on, I'll be right back. He goes to his car. He comes back again a few minutes later. He says, okay, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have a driver's license? And I, again, no, officer. And this time I actually took the Bible and I pointed it at him. And he did this. He put his hands up like I pointed a loaded gun at him. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but, hindsight, several hours later, I'm like, wow, that was pretty impressive. But again, when you put up your hands, who's surrendering? It's not me. So obviously he's recognizing some kind of authority between a certificate, a paramount, a primary, a master certificate that I am refusing, or at least not willing to volunteer to be identified as, plus the good book. These are kind of the codes and statutes and the laws that I'm following. So anyway, he came back the last time and basically says, I'm not going to interfere with your religious beliefs. You gentlemen have a nice evening. So within 5 minutes, and this was a big check stop. It had 2 buses. It had probably 20 vehicles, like 20 cop cars, and probably at least 20 cops running around. Like, this was one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. And I, believe it or not, I saw that thing on the road, right? I saw it a mile ahead. And I still chose to drove right through it, knowing I don't have a driver's license, registration, or insurance. Here, we're going to test the process right now. So again, to answer the question really quickly again, only have the birth certificate with you. And now that you got a bunch of writing on it, you've got an assignment, you got a conveyance, it's mentioning a life estate, you got numbers, you got a silver coin attached to it. I've also taken that to the authorities here, and I talked about it one day in a parking lot to an officer. And as I started talking about it, this is what the officer kind of said to me. He's like, no, we wouldn't have any jurisdiction over that matter whatsoever. What did he just admit right there? Boom. You are entitled. You've taken for granted your entitlements again. This is what I was mentioning yesterday. Can you believe it or not? You've always had the equitable entitlement. It's in your back pocket. Problem is that it's hiding behind that legal entitlement, which we volunteered and claimed to be. Fix that problem. Next.
Beautiful. Okay, what is the relationship between a deed and a trust?
The relationship between a deed and a trust. Okay, so in the world of writing a deed is the paramount instrument that must be duly sealed and duly executed and have value attached. That's what separates a deed from a regular document. These things are much more meaty in the equitable and the legal world. That's why real estate deeds are always done in that context. It's not just here I agree to give you this and you're going to give me that. What do you think? No, again, there's a lot of particulars involved. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of detail, and this is for good measure, so that when it comes to you protecting and or enforcing your rights later, if a problem arises, you've literally protected yourself. You've actually gone to the effort of laying out a nice little package that a judge or a clerk can rectify a situation if you run into a bad one. So again, the relationship is the deed is used to create the trust, a deed of trust. This is the formal writing. And what does a trust technically do? Well, it's just a fancy agreement. It's just a fancy contract to set up conditions and terms, obligations, something that's going to transfer from party A to party B. It's just going to outline the menu of what it is you're trying to do. So again, can a trust be created by voice? Do you have to have it in deed? Well, okay, you expressing it by voice is actually in deed, depending on who you say it to, right? We're literally expressing contracts and trusts all the time. It's an agreement. That's all it is. But again, the deed concept here is that this is going to get recorded at land titles. And believe it or not, they actually have certain requirements when it comes to deeds. You can't just send the registrar of deeds 1 or 2 sentences written in crayon on a napkin. No, they're not going to really like that a whole lot. They kind of have protocols and standards and procedures that they would like us to follow.
Okay, perfect. So we're seeing more and more situations where employers are demanding vaccination. Yeah. I'm going to try not to say that whole word. How can we protect ourselves from this?
Okay, yeah. So this is first and foremost. This was the entire premise of our adverse claim package. It was to set the stage so that we could take this as notice, send that to your health minister, and say, hey, you might want to take notice of a certain private situation involving a certain protected individual who happens to be in possession of a certain equitable interest, who actually has a better claim to equity should it arise the need for me to take your ass to court. Again, you can just literally lay this stuff out. Having that document, though, having that perfected interest, this is the tangible evidence that a judge is going to want to see. The Minister of Health would look at that and go, I have no idea what the hell that is. Doesn't matter, because he's sending it to the legal department. So we already know he's going to send it to the legal department, the Department of Justice. So why wouldn't we also forward it to the Attorney General while we're sending it to the Minister of Health? Pretty good idea. But again, send it to the deputy care of the Attorney General. Don't send it directly to the Attorney General. This is kind of that hierarchy that they got going around in the background. As a matter of fact, if you go check out the your area's civil court rules of procedure, it's going to suggest if you are bringing a claim against the state or the Crown, they actually direct your attention to send it to the Deputy Attorney General in many cases. So there you go.
And we would like to clear up a hot topic going on in the chat right now, which we see all the time. Who is grantor? Who is grantee? We covered this yesterday.
It's a good one.
We're going to cover it one more time. Go.
Okay, so depending on the circumstances, believe it or not, here this goes. Mom and dad grant something of interest to the state. They're the grantee at the moment. Now they have that thing. Now they, as grantor, grant it back to you in the form of a certificate. We literally have that thing as grantee. We take that thing as grantee, perfect the absolute interest in it, now turn around as grantor, grant it back to the state, who's now what? The grantee. Next question.
Excellent. So the title just moves.
Yeah, we're just moving. Yeah, we're literally just moving that title around. So again, this is what I'm suggesting, depending on where you are in your process, hopefully you're the grantee for the moment because you're trying to provide the grantor with the thing that he needs to get rid of. So that's why, again, Dean and I kind of shot ourselves in the ass for a number of years when we are claiming to be the grantor and beneficiary in the same sentence, which defeats the entire trust expression that we were trying to create vocally, which is why we confused and frustrated so many court processes over the years. I actually kind of feel bad, but you know what? That was part of the learning process. Here we are.
Okay, so we're going to change topic a little bit as far as if you were an immigrant, what ID you use to start the process. Are you using your citizenship card or the original birth certificate, and where do you send these?
The paramount document here, if you have it, is the birth certificate. If for whatever reason you no longer are, if you don't have one, or if you can no longer get one for whatever the case may be, yeah, you can refer to your citizenship documents, because all we need to do is describe an interest in the instrument that created the citizenship. There had to be a landed event somewhere registered that proves the existence of the event. That's why it's called a registration. A registered event is something that has happened and actually exists. It's there. This is what creates the record in the first place. Again, it's a loosey-goosey form of reality. Again, it's all kind of fictionist at this point. But when you enter equity and we start bringing those doctrines, equity is what allows us to really get ourselves subrogated, put ourselves in a real position of interest where we can actually use the right of beneficial use. So the citizenship, whatever documents you have, work with it. If you want to do a little bit of legwork to supplement it with the original, the birth certificate, great. If you can, don't worry about it. As long as you got something issued by the government, you can literally claim, well, I lost everything else. As a matter of fact, when I made a passport application a few years back, when they asked me, where is my foundational identity document? I actually stated it was destroyed by fire. And I remember the passport agent looked at me kind of funny, like, what do you mean it was destroyed by fire? But that's actually where, pursuant to Deuteronomy 7:23 and 7:25, whichever the one it was, I can't remember off the top of my head, it said to burn those graven images with fire. So I literally did. Consequently, I had to order them again later anyway, because I didn't quite do the process properly. But again, this is where there's sometimes confusion between what the scriptures are saying to do literally and then what they're actually saying metaphorically. Burn them with fire, what literally meant just remove them from your mind, remove them from your heart, your spirit, right? You didn't necessarily have to burn the thing, because how do you render it back under Caesar if you just burnt it? Well, here, let me correct that for a second. If you just had it in your mind for a moment, okay, I burnt the instrument, but I remember the registration number, so I'm going to conduct this motion, this proceeding, this petition, this requisition based solely on that registration number and what the name was. That is enough to execute and effect and give power and force to your trust agreement. So I'm not going to suggest to go out there and burn these things. No, we're trying to actually put them into the possession of a new party in interest, a successor in interest. But yeah, okay, so there you go. I actually did burn mine.
Are we depending on the Crown binding legislation in order to get through these procedures we're doing?
Okay, well, here's the interesting part. Are we relying on it? You can best describe this as, for the moment, because we are presumed to be trustees, debtors, and the surety. Yeah, I'm not opposed to leaning on a little bit of legislation to get the ball rolling, especially when we're talking about the Trustee Act, especially a legislative power that gives you, the debtor, the ability to change the position or change the relationship of the parties to this vessel. So is that using legislation? Yeah, you know what? I'm not opposed to using it a little bit. But again, it's all in how we word our stuff. You know, in virtue of section 123 of Act 456, right? In virtue of is literally invoking doctrine. I actually stay away from according to, pursuant to. I actually prefer the word in virtue, because we're saying, hey, I'm at an elevated position. I'm acting virtuous. When you're acting virtuous, what does that imply? That you're trying to correct dirty hands, that you're trying to, settle a conflict. There's nothing more honorable than a man or woman coming forward to correct a wrongdoing, a mistake, an error, or a fraud, especially when we're the ones that made it. Again, yeah, we can have the debate all day long about, well, we didn't know when we were 16, it's not our fault, and fraud vitiates all, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I know. But you know what? Rather than create more controversy, why don't we just settle it? Why don't we just say, yep, Your Honor, I made a mistake. I accepted the punishment by using an identification that did not belong to me. I took it. I assumed its identity. Isn't that what you did? Of course it is. And when you assume somebody else's identity, what are you actually trying to do? The law looks at it like this. You're intending to deceive. You're intending to commit fraud. You're intending to commit a wrongdoing every time we attach that name to any application for our benefit. It's borderline fraud, but they let us get away with it because now they can siphon our life energy from us as a consequence. Caesar's happy. Again, it's because of our lack of wisdom and knowledge that put us in that situation. I'm not suggesting I'm blaming mom and dad. No, they didn't have a clue what this stuff is all about. But that's why I feel very blessed that we are now in a position to finally do something about it.
Okay, so how does what we're doing with divergence apply to countries outside of the Commonwealth?
Okay, well, countries outside of the Commonwealth, almost all of these countries are still operating under the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. This banking scheme is still, in general terms, the system that runs the globe right now. All of these systems are still based on birth certificates and or birth events. So again, I heard a while ago that China was trying to implement a birth certificate problem, or a situation, but they were running into problems because there's whatever their situation was. I don't know if they are at this point or not, to be honest with you, loved ones. So maybe certain elements here would be a little bit more tricky. Here's the question though. Would equity apply in China? Of course. Again, China is just a corporation masquerading as a landmass. Equity is attached to the land. I'm going to suggest this. Wherever there is land, equity is also there. It has to be. I don't care if it's another planet. Doesn't matter. It's still land. You are land with feet and hands and a face and a mouth. You came from the dust, did you not? Even if we want to explore the evolution of the monkey theory, they still came from the land. So at the end of the day, everything comes from the land. That's why the land is so important. That's why dealing with landed interests. That's when aliens landing. Again, where I'm going to get into this on Friday. I don't want to do too much of a spoiler here, but as an alien, think of them as simply a foreigner to a current situation. Is the police officer going to pull over an alien for failing to stop at a stop sign? Probably not. The alien does not fall within the jurisdiction of the police officer, correct? So are we technically aliens to a commercial system? Do the headwork on that for a minute. Go look in scriptures when it starts talking about aliens. See, we're actually getting somewhere. When the aliens arrive, the aliens have landed. See where I'm going with this? Isn't the word of the aliens going to bring prosperity, peace, happiness throughout the planet? Doesn't that kind of resonate with the things we're trying to do? So again, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag here too far, but I kind of did already.
And we'll be talking a little bit about our Equity and Aliens Kindergarten School that Darren's going to be doing on Friday at the end. He'll kind of tell you a little bit more about that. So thank you so much. And please, loved ones, when you are writing your questions in the chat, please be mindful that we have tons coming in. So if you have a certain question in regards to something, please tag it in your question. Otherwise, we're asking half questions and we will skip over it. Please take some time to make it English and so that we can read it. It's legible. Otherwise, again, we will skip over it.
Okay, I'm not going to skip over this one. Seems so odd to have so many things registered with land registry other than land. Yeah, I know. It's kind of strange, right? It's like a whole construct was created, a 3D construct to keep us fooled when the real land has been deemed to be incapacitated, lost at sea. So imagine that's why we have no civil rights anymore. They were granted to the state. They're holding it for us. But yeah, it is interesting that all these interests are registered at land titles for the benefit of a corporation in which we have no control over. Why? Because we're in possession of its little identification card, using it improperly. Big problem we got to fix. First and foremost, again, this is why we're trying to do it this way. And I saw a question yesterday about come on, hurry up, get to the meat and potatoes. Do we have to go through all this stuff still? And again, just bear with us here. I can lay this stuff out at a high RPM. I can lay this stuff out for 3 hours a day to the point where I can lay this out faster than you can actually download it mentally, spiritually, and use it. Because you're still catching up from the 3 hours yesterday. And now I just dropped another 3 on you today. So you see how you'll actually develop a deficit real quick. Now, I'm trying to actually direct and steer this boat so that I can actually impress you with as much usable content as possible. And you'll find your vibration and frequency is going to raise here pretty quick. It will naturally. Just keep coming to these meetings. You'll see it's going to happen. And again, I don't mind answering questions that may feel like they're at a 5-year-old's level, because you know what? I started there one day, not that long ago. So I do not look down upon you. The queens do not, assert a certain hoity-toityness over you because you're up and coming. No, we're all up and coming. Fact. Continuing.
Do we work through a proxy?
Do we work through a proxy? Do you not work through an all caps name right now? Yeah, you do. Get control of that proxy. That's the problem. Because you're in possession of the proxy, somebody else is in control. Do we go here? I think this is where the question is actually going though. Do we need to set up another proxy to deal with this proxy? I'm going to say no. And here's why. All that's really the object of the game here, all that's really happening is when that security certificate leaves the account and goes out into the world of commerce, that proxy literally just has to come back home. Once it's deposited or specially reposited into your minor account that is connected to the custodian's account. They're linked. When you're of the age of majority, this is what, in theory, unlocks the whole process for us. So again, in a nutshell, really, at the end of the day, the proxy, you've already got one. Get control of it, though. How do you get control? You got to take control for granted. And I love this one because we were always told our whole lives, stop taking things for granted. Don't take things for granted. Right? It's like that was beat into us to the point where we would never consider taking something for granted. Well, see how we can chop a whole lot of our process right out of the equation when you can literally roll in and say, Your Honor, well, I've taken for granted that the equitable right ought to vest in the proper party, which I deem and claim to be entitled to do. Your Honor, do you agree? Your Honor, do you disclaim? This is where you're going to hear crickets. He won't answer that. What did he just tell you by not answering that? Move on to your next statement. And as such, lay out the next one. I'm entitled to an injunction, a specific performance, an accounting, appointment of a personal representative, as my trust is found wanting, Your Honor. And I know no trust can fail for want of trustee. Do you see what you've already done in the space of 3 sentences? Massive. Did I answer that question good, or am I?
Yeah,
Did
absolutely.
I get sidetracked?
A little bit, but that's okay.
Okay.
Can you please elaborate on what unincorporating the name is?
I don't think we should unincorporate the name that belongs to the corporation. Let's just come up with another name that takes control of the first name. You see what's going on there? Again, this is where the royal family, go look at their birth certificates. They're online. I've seen 5 of them. They look nothing like the birth certificate you had and the one I had. Why is that? England's not on it. London's not on it. The public's not on it. It's a different form of an event that happened naturally. I was born naturally on such and such a day, whatever this instrument looks like. Now, you can have that witnessed by a couple of people, private witnesses. Remember, restrict that capacity a little bit, tighten it up. Now you actually take that to the registrar of births and get the registrar of births to stamp it, put their signature on it. You know what you just did? You literally just brought the you into the equation to replace, sorry, you brought a new you. And again, I don't really like to use the word new or you because that actually has other connotations attached to it. But again, for the sake of argument, I'm just going to use it here because we all know what we're talking about. So a new you shows up to replace the old you. Boom. That's an old title, a new title, merging, a new something exists. Very important.
So are you collapsing the minor trust into a new trust then with the new name?
Yeah, absolutely. That minor trust now goes away. It literally implodes. It gets converted. It gets transmuted. It gets alchemized. You turned lead and dead weight into living, walking gold. Again, I'm not using gold as an idolatrous medium at the moment. I'm just trying to establish where the value is in a distinctive kind of form. However, yeah, get out of that position of using that old name for your own benefit. Can you imagine when you grant it to the state? Don't they benefit from it at some level now? Well, of course they do. When this thing just showed up, it unlocks the minor's account. That minor's account now transforms into a different account. Its status or standing or present state of being is changed. This is why a change of the interest of the parties is very important. Sorry, your officer, a change of the interest of the parties is present. You say, what are you talking about? Well, I happen to have possession of an equitable interest, which means you happen to have possession of a legal interest. Are you going to actually write a ticket against the crown, knowing that I'm dispossessed of that legal interest? Again, once you get that noodle wrapped around some of the meanings and the connotations and how we can actually use this phraseology, start being creative. Start going down and say, yeah, okay, got it. Darren, what do you think of this example? Boom, throw one up here in your question. And again, I'll tweak it. We'll go over it. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing here. So I'm asking for input. I'm asking for where you're at. Again, I could probably, if the cop was rolling up to me right now, do I know what I'm going to say? Do I have it scripted for myself? It's not scripted, but it's up here, right? You can just talk to this stuff. And again, don't be a belligerent.
So once we take on the equitable title, what happens to the legal one?
The legal one vests in new trustees. Dean talked about this for years. Divest yourself. Dean's been talking about divestment for years. What is he actually talking about there? He's literally talking about divesting or stripping that legal interest off of you, giving it to the judge so that he may now vest it in new trustees. You notice how it's the word vest? Isn't a vest an article of clothing? If you're clothed or if you're cloaked with a certain something, you see how that actually changes your appearance in the public? Absolutely it does. Now, that equitable cloak, now you're invisible to the public. That's what's actually happened here. You're cloaked. Now, and again, I saw on Facebook or YouTube the other day that some guy paid $500 to a wizard to make him invisible, and then the dude goes into a bank and tries to rob it. So you see how, okay, it didn't quite work in practice. You know why? Because that guy didn't perfect his interests. He wouldn't have had to go walk into the bank to rob it. He could have, with perfected interest, a perfected bond, a perfected security, especially reposit this, set up a special account for set off, and let's go. The banks act as clearinghouses, chartered, every country's got one. Treasury allows, through license agreements, these charter banks to act as clearinghouses, to negotiate securities, to negotiate monies, tangibles, interests, things of this nature. Again, we drop the ball so bad when we go to get a mortgage for a house. Once we start to understand what's really going on, again, we're going to be shocked at how we're taken advantage of. And again, it's not the banker's fault. Kind of is. I mean, that's a bit of a dubious statement. I shouldn't quite say it like that. Yeah, they're the pricks that set this whole thing up so that it was made for us to suffer. But you know what? Here's the beauty, or here's the grace, or here's the blessing in that statement. Once they took advantage of us, they also had to leave the opportunity for us to show up to take advantage of them. That's a balanced situation. Now, here's the shitty part, right? They take and they bury us in legislation and fine print so that we actually never figure out or fully comprehend how to undo what we've done to ourselves. Nobody else did it. We all voluntarily went and made application at a federal level for social communism assistance. Wrong. Big mistake. Do not use this personal identity. Go look at your live birth record. In the margin there, usually on the left, it says, whoever's using this certificate, you're about to pledge your allegiance to a country, so be careful. It's a bit of a warning right there. When we're pledging allegiance, again, as I was saying the other day, careful with that, because that's intrepidating on the second master doctrine. Careful.
With the birth certificate you just mentioned, are you collapsing the minor trust into a new trust then with the new name?
Yes, the new trust is the one you express. This trust didn't exist until you express it. How do you express it? Well, a written deed's a good start. And once you get that really comprehended, go ahead and start flying these things off the tip of your tongue if you like, sure. But again, takes a little bit of doing, takes a little bit of practice. If you have the confidence to do it, you know what? Consider it done. That's our biggest nemesis, is not having the balls or the ovaries to go do these things in the first place. But once you understand, hey, I'm the wrongdoer here. I got to grant this thing back to them. And by that exchange, I'm owed something. Well, if you also are now in possession of the equitable title, the equitable interest, because you can prove it. How do you prove you're entitled to the equitable interest? Easy. By proving you're not in possession of the legal one. See how that just kind of matured? That's what arises. That's how it just manifests. That's how it just appears out of nowhere. The courts will always structure it like this. Upon hearing such and such argument and appearing before the court. When something appears, again, that's not always a summons relating to a man or woman appearing in court, right? Evidence can appear in court. It doesn't just have to be the plaintiff and the defendant. All kinds of stuff can appear if you give it the legs to do so. Give it expressed energy so that of its own power and accord or effect, it literally stands in its own power. Power of the word. The power of the word transcends to the written word. That's really all that's going. Has the written word lost any power in that exchange? I'm going to say no. Does the written word on paper create the universe? I'm going to say no. But at the same time, we're just talking about powers and how do we use them and who's got it and who doesn't, right? That's why we're subrogating. That's why we're trying to get these titles fixed. Grantee, grantor, surety, subrogee, subrogor, and the list goes on.
Now we have some questions regarding writing letters as a man to the man. Before we answer the questions, please explain that terminology.
Okay, so we're describing an in personam relationship right now. Belly to belly, face to face, no titles. Brad to John, Darren to Rick, Kim to Jody. But this gets a little bit sticky. So establishing who you are and in what capacity at the beginning of your court proceedings or your deed or your affidavit or your security agreement, that's why those clauses are so important. Yeah, I'm of the age of the majority and able to attest to the following. Feel free to embellish on that one a little bit. Feel free to add to that. If you want to suggest having power to direct a financial asset, having this, having that, throw a few more goodies in there. Again, legally, they want to keep us incapacitated, restricted, suffering, and drowning in their little clauses, right? So grab that. That's just an opportunity to inject a little something. Without prejudice is really good, without recourse. Without recourse is actually suggesting you cannot take what I'm about to lay down and divert it or recourse it for another purpose. Nope, you've literally locked the trajectory in, you've pulled the trigger, and the missile's on the way. Oh yeah, hang on, I can send some missiles right here, hang on. Right? Point is, take control. We only have control when we're not in possession. As soon as the officer is made aware by giving him notice, when he asks you for license and registration, your response is notice, officer. Take special notice, under notice. Describe it, get on the notice right away, because you're actually leveling the playing field. If you don't express notice of interest, if you don't follow that up with a statement of interest, you're leaving yourself open to or vulnerable to attack. That's what we're trying to remove, that power from these officers who want to hold us down and hit us with a stick, or the medical system who wants to strap us into a gurney and stick a something into you. That's why, again, to go back to that statement earlier, these notices, once you properly construct them, sending them man to man to the Attorney General as Brad does have force and effect. But again, it's just a matter of being able to word or articulate that properly, because as soon as you kind of start veering back off into legislation or where you're starting to not direct the person properly, they'll jump on you. So as long as you're establishing right off the hop, man to man, I'm coming as a friend of the crown. Well, coming as a friend of the crown means you're not coming in person, because how can you come in person and be a friend to the crown? That's literally walking up to the man or woman that you just stole something from and say, I'm coming to you with clean hands and in honor. They're like, are you kidding me? You just came holding the thing that you stole from me. Get to the back of the line. Try again.
Okay, so about this man-to-man letter, the question is, can you write a letter as a man to the man, acting as the Attorney General when communicating our position as a private person in regards to our bodies and what is put in them?
Absolutely. I strongly encourage that. Get rid of the surnames altogether. Hey, John, this is Steve. I got a problem. I got a conflict with the rules at law. And this is why. And this is because. And because of this, I've done that. And because of that, this was the result. Build it. But you got to start it. I love, again, this is where if you want to come as the person and negotiate the person, that's an option. If you want to come man to man, that's an option. But just don't do both together. Pick one. Otherwise, things get a little bit confusing. Styling them in either capacity takes a little bit of doing, takes a little bit of know-how, but give it a whirl, give it a try. Again, I'm not asking you to go generate 40 pages worth of stuff. If you can smash out half a page or 2/3 of a page, getting the nuts and bolts down, you're flying. Absolutely.
Now, in regards to that, with people starting this process, some have reservations or questions around, okay, well, how do I drive now? How do I operate in society? I still need a job. So how does that all play out, and how should they proceed according to taxes, etc.?
Yeah, that all stays the same, believe it or not. That fiction doesn't go, it goes poof in your mind only because you're no longer in possession of it. Did it actually go poof in reality? No, another party's holding it. So when you show up as, again, not the person, what's your name? My name's Steve. What's your last name? Private. What do you mean private? Well, it's been surrendered to the crown. What's your date of birth? Well, that's private too. So it's all depending on how we articulate the wording that is attached to these titles and these positions. It's a matter really of knowing who you are, knowing how to articulate it without crossing the line. That's essentially, the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do here. Does that letter man to man to a judge, the attorney general, does it bear fruit? Well, you better believe it does. But again, just articulate it properly.
Okay, so this is a question we want to ask around the adverse claim. Is my plea or copy as the original required, or is a copy sufficient?
I have experimented with both. I like sending originals to the judge, and then I like to maintain copies. You could literally say, such and such, take this in possession as I have a copy in my vault. They will not negotiate copies. Notice that. We actually tried at the federal level to change the status of our social insurance number. They requested in the one piece of paper, the one document, and when they responded to us, they mentioned the word original documents 3 times in the course of one page. So they want the originals. You keep copies. Again, it's theirs. Give them theirs back. Take a copy of it. That's fine. The fact that you're not in possession of the original is actually a stronger position, believe it or not. Because it now sets the stage that, oh shit, maybe he did transfer it. Maybe she did deliver it to another party. Well, because look, I got proof of mailing here too. I can prove I sent it to the Attorney General's office for these purposes and under these conditions and for this intent. And look, I attached a little bit of love and affection. I threw a silver coin at it. You can paint such a beautiful picture. And once you do paint that picture, you can actually speak to it pretty easily. Well, which is why I'm encouraging you as men and women, individuals, loved ones, to go ahead and build these things for yourself so that you're comfortable knowing that, hey, I made this thing. I can relate to it because I made it. Yeah, all these words may not be mine, but at least I put pen to paper. Pen to paper, written deeds actually is very important. Always. So have that as your ID. Have that adverse claim. This is who I am not. I'm not this thing, but I can negotiate it. I can attach interests to it. I can extinguish debt with it. This is like Harry Potter's little wand. You can do evil with it or good. Again, that thing's a blessing or a curse, depending on how we used it.
The counterclaim, is it the bill in equity?
Oh yeah, it sure is. The counterclaim, again, that's just leveling the playing field. When someone's coming after you and you're the defendant, you have pretty limited rights. You got some, but they're very limited. They're restricted. You want to come as the petitioner, the plaintiff, the applicant. That word's synonymous. The plaintiff or the petitioner brings the jurisdiction in which he brings a claim or a suit for a claim. Well, now again, as the petitioner, You're going to bring equity. Do not bring legal statutes into your bill in equity. Nope, that's the commingle, and our instrument will fail on its face. Right there. The judges and the clerks are trained. They know. Again, okay, well then what are the equitable remedies, or what are the equitable prayers that we're seeking? As I've mentioned a number of times, there's 4 primary ones. An injunction is huge. That can be used to do a whole lot of stuff. And accounting is huge. It's going to put you in the position where you are able to discharge debt, extinguish debt, because the accounting has been done on your behalf. The personal representative is pretty important, right? They're going to be the ones that follow you as commissioners. You are on a mission to serve Christ Lord Jesus, and you have commissioners following you around, executing your will, your wishes, your desire, whatever school or hospital that you need to build right here, whatever superhighway you need to build right there, you're the one that can deal with this stuff. This is where the vesting order comes in. By a vesting order, the judge will appoint new trustees. 2 ways to do this. One of these vesting principles is done through a security and administrative agreement, which is private, which the other party will actually agree to, or the judge and the courts will appoint by vesting a new trustee. 2 ways to do it. You do it privately. A private appointment is a vesting order. You have the thing to vest. You don't need a third party to get involved. But if you run into a problem, go to the courts, go to the judge. Your Honor, I got a question regarding such and such an instrument here. This deed of trust, I'm not sure in the construction here, and I don't want to harm or bring any harm to a party. So that's why I require the aid and assistance of a judge sitting in chambers to help me with this deed construction, this trust construction. Will they help you? Yeah, that's what they're there for. Do you think it's reasonable that we have to know all these ins and outs, all these nuances, all these ups and downs, this entire roller coaster? Do you think that, again, I'm just going to throw a number out there, 20 years researching and developing some of this stuff. Is it reasonable that everybody has to spend 20 years with, of digging to get this knowledge? No. Your Honor, I'm here with some equitable doctrines. I'm here with some clean hands. I can prove I've got a private security agreement or a private administrative agreement that the Attorney General ignored. That's why I'm coming to you now, Your Honor, to get a court-appointed trustee through a vesting order. That shitty legal title's been divested out of me and re-vested into a new trustee. That is an equitable remedy. Vesting orders are equitable remedies. They're acknowledged at law or on the public side, but they are fundamentally an equitable remedy. One of the 5 dynamite ones. Again, accounting, specific performance, personal representative, injunction, and a vesting order. That is essentially all you're really asking for in the decree that you're seeking. That's it. Everything else is implied. Everything else the judge knows, okay, yeah, he's going to need this, that, and the other. Again, they're not a bunch of phony baloney dummies sitting behind the bench. They happen to know some stuff, and they're there to help you. Don't come as a belligerent. Don't come in person. And again, I know there has been success stories of people coming in person and still navigating and defeating the bad guys. Yeah, you know what? But that's a tough road. Dean and I and many other loved ones have struggled with that one, and it's very hit and miss. As soon as Caesar decides that you're no longer going to win today, guess who loses? They actually did this to Dean while he was in jail. Dean did up a big pleading, and I helped him with it, and we knew it was solid. And by the time he presented it in court, I know we've only got a minute here, by the time he presented it in court, the lawyers were already laughing because that legislation that Dean was relying on had already been repealed. They took it out. So they literally pulled the rug out from underneath them. So again, we do not really rely on acts and statutes, only the Trustee Act to appoint new trustees. That's about it. That's the only thing we're ever really going to discuss. All the other legislation, it applies to the new trustees. And Your Honor, I know that you're going to enforce that for me. I know we're just about out of time. How do you want to do this? One more question?
Well, we actually just wanted to talk about real quickly that, for the newbies on here, if this is new for you, this terminology, Divergence did do equity for newbies. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach the document on here. It's a transcript where Darren went through and kind of laid it all out, gives you a little bit more terminology, a little bit more understanding on the words that he uses and the process of that. So as an extra little nugget, an equity nugget, we're going to post that on here for all of you that showed up to this wonderful Zoom that we were able to provide for you. Please continue to put your questions into the chat. Be sure to ask them in full. When you're asking something and vesting order, we don't know what that applies to. We need the first part of the question. This is what we're asking for.
Yeah.
So make sure you rattle it through. We'll combine them and we'll ask more questions and answers later.
Yeah, and again, I can fill in a lot of the blanks on the fly here. That's the benefit of having the access to me, just live stream. This is why this, I think, is going to be so important. And I know we got to wrap this up here right in a second. Yeah, okay. So just as a reminder, Kindergarten is presenting its Aliens and Equity Lowdown here coming up 7:30 Vancouver time on Friday, October 22. So you might want to stick around with that one, as I've already alluded to a little bit. Moving forward, I'm thinking, given the amount of substance that I'm going to be laying down here every few days, I think it's going to be smart that we actually set aside maybe every third show just to do questions, okay? And then that way we can kind of stay ahead of this and I can kind of keep everything equalized, ready? Because that's ultimately all we're trying to do here. So having said all that, I love you all a whole bunch, and stay vigilant, stay strong. Equity is with you. We love you all, and you have an incredible support system behind you that you're just coming to understand right now.
Thanks, loved ones. We'll
Peace,
see you next
everybody.
time.
Love ya.
Bye now.